Gabriel paused, his face serious. This process is untested. It's never been done on a Valorian before. The chances of success are uncertain. You might undergo changes you can't control, and there might be risks to your health. Serenia's mind raced. She had nothing to lose. She had tried everything else, everything that her people and their sacred traditions had offered, but nothing had worked. This might be her only chance. "I understand," she said, her voice firm, unwilling to take the risk. Gabriel nodded. "All right, let's begin." With one last glance at her, Gabriel gently placed the crystal against her skin, near her heart. As soon as it touched her, Serenia felt a sharp pulse of energy, like an electric current running through her veins. It was overwhelming, almost painful, but there was something comforting about it, too. It was as though the very essence of her body was being rewritten, the building blocks of her biology being adjusted, remade. For a long moment, there was only the feeling of energy pulsing through her. She closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the sensations. Her body felt as though it was vibrating, as though every molecule was shifting in some unknown way. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Serenia opened her eyes and looked at Gabriel, her breath coming in short gasps. The world around her seemed to spin slightly, but she felt different, stronger, more aware of herself, her body, her energy. It was as though she had been awakened, like a dormant part of her had finally come to life. Gabriel stepped back, observing her closely. "How do you feel?" Serenia swallowed, trying to steady her breath. "I don't know. I feel strange. But I think it worked." Gabriel gave a small smile, though his eyes were filled with concern. "It's going to take time. The process won't be immediate. The changes will take a few days, maybe even weeks, to fully manifest. You'll have to be patient and let your body adjust." Serenia nodded, though she couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and fear. What had she just done? Could she really become a mother in a way she had never imagined? Would her society accept her after this? Would she be able to live with the changes to her own body, to her very identity? As the days passed, Serenia felt the transformation within her intensify. At first, it was subtle, small shifts in her energy levels, a heightened sensitivity to the world around her. She began to notice things she had never paid attention to before. The subtle hum of life in the plants and animals around her, the way the wind seemed to whisper ancient secrets in her ears, the vivid colors of the world that now appeared more alive than ever before. But then the physical changes began. Her skin, once flawless and silver like the rest of her people, began to change. It shimmered in a way that it had never done before, glowing softly in the dark. Her eyes, once a bright, polished silver, began to take on a deeper hue, a shade of violet that was both beautiful and otherworldly. Her senses grew sharper, and she began to feel a new kind of energy coursing through her, an energy that was foreign, yet strangely familiar. Serenia spent the next few weeks isolated in her chambers, as the changes in her body became more pronounced. She couldn't explain it, but she felt different, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. She was beginning to understand what Gabriel had meant when he spoke of the heart and the spirit. There was more to motherhood than biology. There was something deeper, something that connected all living things, something that she had never known before. And one evening, as she gazed out at the city beneath the twin suns, Serenia realized something. She was no longer just a Valorian woman bound by the expectations of her society. She was something more, something that had never existed before. She was changing, not just her body, but her very essence. She was becoming a mother in a way she had never imagined. The transformation had begun, and there was no turning back. The changes Serenia had been experiencing in the weeks since Gabriel's strange procedure were more than she could have ever expected. At first, she had felt the transformation as an almost physical sensation. It was like a vibration coursing through her body, like something ancient and deep awakening inside her. Her skin shimmered with a new kind of glow, her senses sharpened to an almost painful degree, and the world around her seemed alive in ways she had never noticed before. But as the days passed, that initial excitement began to fade, replaced by uncertainty and fear. The doubts started creeping in, small whispers that grew louder with each passing hour. Was she truly ready for this change? Was she making the right choice by embracing something so unknown? And more importantly, would her people, the Valorians, accept her after this? In the grand hall of the Valorian Assembly, beneath the shimmering glass domes that let in the bright rays of the two suns above, the air was thick with the voices of dozens of delegates. The Valorians, a race of towering, silver-skinned beings, were known throughout the galaxy for their strength, intelligence, and ancient culture. Their society had flourished for millennia, thanks in part to their strict adherence to traditions. One of the most sacred of these traditions was the concept of motherhood. A Valorian woman was expected to bear children, preferably many, ensuring the continuation of their race and the preservation of their noble heritage. In the center of the hall, a large crystal podium stood surrounded by the eager eyes of the council members, all waiting for the next speaker. Standing tall and poised at the podium was Serenia, a woman of extraordinary beauty and grace. Her long, platinum hair cascaded down her back like a river of light, and her silver eyes glowed softly, reflecting the unity of the Valorian people. To the outside world, Serenia was the epitome of perfection, a woman who had been groomed for greatness. She was the daughter of a high-ranking council member and a symbol of the Valorian ideal. But today, something was different. Today, Serenia was not here to speak of the Valorians' victories or their prosperous future. Instead, she had come to share a deeply personal confession. The murmurs in the hall grew louder as Serenia stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been afraid of public speaking, but this was different. This was a moment of vulnerability, a moment that could change everything. "I stand before you today," Serenia began, her voice steady, though there was a tightness in her throat. Not as a proud daughter of Valoria, but as a woman who has failed her people. A wave of confusion rippled through the assembly. Her words were unexpected, unsettling. The delegates exchanged confused glances, unsure of where this was heading. "I have been infertile," Serenia continued, her voice softer now, almost as if the admission pained her. "For years, I have tried. I've gone through countless treatments, medical procedures, rituals, but nothing has worked. I cannot bear children." There was a stunned silence in the hall. The air seemed to thicken, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone in the room. To the Valorians, fertility was not just a biological trait, it was a moral duty, a sacred calling. A woman who could not conceive was considered broken in a way no man or woman could understand. And for someone like Serenia, so revered, so perfect in the eyes of Valoria, that failure was even more devastating. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The shimmering light of the two suns outside seemed dimmer. The delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging looks that were laced with pity, confusion, and even judgment. It was a heavy burden to bear, and Serenia felt every eye on her, each one a silent accusation. The council leader, an imposing figure named Darnath, cleared his throat and stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow over the room. He was the most respected member of the assembly, a man who had guided Valoria through countless crises. He was a man who had always upheld the traditions, the values that made Valoria what it was. "Serenia," Darnath's voice was deep, reverberating through the hall. "You are a valued member of this assembly. Your intelligence, your dedication to our cause, have always been beyond reproach. But this is a grave matter. Are you certain? Have you sought all possible means to rectify this condition?" Serenia nodded slowly, her silver eyes now filled with a quiet sorrow. "I have. There is no cure. I've seen the best doctors, undergone every treatment imaginable. I have even gone through the sacred fertility rite, which is said to bless a woman with the ability to conceive. But nothing works. It is as if the very essence of motherhood has been stripped from me." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. The fertility rite was a ritual so sacred that only the most revered women in Valoria were allowed to undergo it. To fail it was considered a great dishonor. Serenia had been one of the youngest to ever undergo the rite, and for her to fail so publicly was something no one had anticipated. Not even the wisest of the Valorian doctors had expected it. Darnath's face softened, but only slightly. "This is a tragedy, Serenia. But perhaps it is not the end. There are other ways to contribute to Valoria. You could help our people in other ways. Continue to serve us through leadership, counsel, or diplomacy." Serenia spent hours staring at her reflection in the mirror, studying her new features. Her once silver skin now shimmered with a soft golden hue, and her eyes, which had once been a bright, flawless silver, now gleamed with a deep violet that almost seemed to glow in the darkness. She looked different, so different that she barely recognized herself. And the changes weren't just physical. She could feel something stirring within her, a deep connection to life itself that was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was as though the very essence of who she was shifting, changing into something unrecognizable. One evening, as the twin suns began to set and cast their orange and purple light across the city of Valoria, Serenia stood by her window, looking out over the sprawling city below. The streets were filled with people, Valorians of every age and rank, walking, talking, and living their daily lives. Everything seemed normal, yet everything had changed. She had changed, and she didn't know if she could go back to the way things were. But there was something else weighing heavily on her mind, the Valorian Council. Her people had always placed a great deal of importance on tradition, on what was expected. To be a mother in the traditional sense was a sacred duty, something that defined a woman's worth in their society. What she had done, what Gabriel had shown her, was beyond anything they could understand. What if they rejected her for it? What if they saw her as a failure, someone who had broken their sacred bond with nature? A knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned around to see her closest friend, Lyra, standing in the doorway. Lyra was a strong and respected member of their society, known for her wisdom and unwavering loyalty to the Valorian way. But Serenia could see the concern in her friend's eyes as she stepped into the room. "Serenia," Lyra said gently, closing the door behind her. "You've been distant lately. What's going on?" "We've all noticed it." Serenia sighed, her shoulders slumping. She had wanted to keep her transformation a secret, but she knew it was only a matter of time before others began to notice the changes. And it wasn't just her appearance. Her behavior had started to shift, too. She was becoming more withdrawn, more introspective, as if the very foundation of her identity had been shattered. Lyra was her closest friend, and Serenia knew she couldn't keep the truth hidden any longer. "I don't know what's happening to me, Lyra," Serenia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something inside me has changed. I feel different. I'm not sure if it's for the better or for the worse." Lyra studied her friend carefully, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "You've always been strong, Serenia. You've always known what you wanted, what you were meant to do." Serenia shook her head, her hand reaching up to touch the shimmering surface of her skin. "It's not about strength anymore. It's about something deeper, something I can't explain. Gabriel, he showed me something. He said there are other ways to become a mother, ways that go beyond the traditional methods. And I agreed to it. I thought it was the answer I'd been searching for." Lyra's eyes widened in shock. You underwent one of his treatments. You've changed yourself without knowing what it will truly mean." Serenia nodded, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. "I had to. I was desperate, Lyra. I couldn't keep living with this pain, this feeling of being broken. I needed to find a way to heal. But now, I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know if I made a mistake." Lyra stepped closer, her expression softening. Serenia, you're my closest friend. But this is dangerous. We don't know anything about what Gabriel has done. The risks are too high. What if you can't reverse it? What if this change is permanent? I don't know, Serenia whispered, her voice trembling. But I have to try. I've spent my entire life following the rules, living up to everyone's expectations. And I thought if I could just have a child, if I could just fulfill that one duty, I would finally be whole. But Gabriel said there's another way. He said I don't have to be defined by my infertility. And maybe I'm finally starting to believe that. Lyra sighed, her shoulders sagging as she sat beside her friend. I understand your pain, Serenia. I do. But this is a decision you can't take lightly. We don't know what these changes mean for you or for your future. And what about the council? If they find out, if they learn what you've done, they might condemn you. You could lose everything. Serenia looked down at the polished crystal floor, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the edges of the podium. I understand, Darnath, she said, her voice almost breaking. But you do not understand. I have failed in the most fundamental way. To be a Valorian woman is to bear children. That is our purpose. Without that, I am nothing. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They could see the truth in her words. Serenia's failure was not just a personal loss. It was a loss for Valoria itself. It was as though a part of their society's core had crumbled before their eyes. I am sorry, Serenia whispered, more to herself than anyone else. I am sorry to all of you, to my family, and to Valoria. I wish I could give you the future you deserve. As her words fell into the silence of the hall, Serenia could feel the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down on her. She had failed in a way that she could not undo, and now she was left with nothing but the shattered remnants of what she had once been. The murmurs of the assembly began again, this time filled with pity. She felt her heart break with every passing second. But then something unexpected happened. A voice broke through the tension, one that was not from the council. Why is it that you are defined by your inability to bear children? The voice was soft, but firm. It came from the back of the hall, where a human, a stranger to the Valorian assembly, stood. The human was small compared to the Valorians, dressed in simple clothing. His presence in the grand hall was an anomaly. Humans had rarely been allowed into the sacred chambers of Valoria. All eyes turned to him in shock, including Serenia's. She had not noticed him until now. And for a moment, his presence seemed to jar her thoughts. Who are you? Darnath demanded, his voice filled with authority. This is a private matter of our people. The human didn't flinch. I am someone who understands what it means to be broken, just like you, he said, his gaze now meeting Serenia's. But I also know that being broken does not define who you are. You are more than your inability to bear children. You are a person. You are a leader. You are someone who can still make a difference, whether you carry a child or not. Serenia's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something deep inside her, a spark of defiance, of hope. She looked at the human, her silver eyes locking onto his. And that's when she realized. Perhaps there was more to life than simply fulfilling the role her society had assigned her. Perhaps there was another path, another way to contribute to Valoria. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but the words of the human had planted a seed in her mind. She was not finished. She was not broken. The silence in the Valorian assembly hall hung thick and uncomfortable after the human spoke. Serenia's heart raced as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. This was not a place for outsiders, especially not humans. The Valorians had long believed that humans were inferior, weak, fragile creatures compared to their own kind. They were barely considered worthy of being allies, let alone invited into their most sacred chambers. Yet here he was, a man, small in stature, but with an undeniable presence. His clothes were simple and unadorned, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the Valorian robes worn by the council members. His dark hair was slightly messy, and his eyes were filled with a quiet determination that somehow pierced through the tension in the air. Serenia had no idea how he had gotten past the guards or why he was here, but one thing was clear. He was not afraid. As the assembly members shifted uncomfortably, he stood his ground, his gaze never leaving her. "Who is this?" Darnath, the council leader, demanded, his deep voice cutting through the heavy silence. The human did not flinch. Instead, he looked directly at Serenia, as if the others in the room didn't exist. His words were soft, but there was a conviction in his tone that was impossible to ignore. "I'm not here to cause trouble," the human said calmly, his voice steady. "I'm here because I think I can help." Serenia blinked, surprised by his directness. What did he mean by help? He had no idea what she had been through, no understanding of the pressure that had been placed on her shoulders her entire life. She was a Valorian, a proud, powerful species, and here he was, an outsider, a human, offering her help. She opened her mouth to respond, but Darnath was quicker, his booming voice cutting through the tension. "You dare speak in such a manner within the sacred halls of Valoria. You are not welcome here, human. Leave at once." But the human stood his ground, unshaken. Serenia noticed the way his eyes seemed to soften when they met hers. It was almost as if he understood her pain, as if he could see through the polished exterior she had worn for so long. She had become a symbol of perfection to her people, strong, beautiful, flawless. But on the inside, she was broken. The weight of her infertility pressed down on her every day, and the silence around her only made it worse. The human spoke again, but this time, his voice was aimed directly at her. "You're not broken," he said, his words simple but filled with a quiet strength. "I can see it in your eyes. You're hurting, but you're not beyond help." Serenia froze, her breath catching in her throat. How could he know? How could this stranger, this human, know anything about what she was feeling? She had spent years hiding her pain behind a mask of stoicism. No one had ever seen her like this before, not even her closest friends. And yet this man, this human, saw her for what she was. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at him. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've tried everything. Every treatment, every ritual. Nothing works. I am not meant to be a mother." The human's expression softened, and he took a small step forward. He didn't say anything for a moment, but the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. It was almost as though he understood the weight of her words, the depth of her despair. Finally, he spoke again, but this time, his voice was gentle, almost like a quiet reassurance. "What if I told you there's more to being a mother than just giving birth?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. "What if I told you that being a mother isn't just about biology? It's about the heart, the spirit." Serenia's mind raced as she processed his words. Was he mocking her? Was he suggesting something impossible? In Valoria, a woman's worth was often tied to her ability to conceive, to bear children who would carry on the legacy of their people. It was a duty, a sacred calling. And yet this human was saying something entirely different. "Who are you?" Serenia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you here?" The human seemed to hesitate for a moment, as though considering how much to reveal. Then, with a deep breath, he answered. "My name is Gabriel," he said simply. "I come from Earth, a planet you probably haven't heard much about. Humans, where I come from, are often underestimated. We don't have the physical strength or longevity of your species. But we have something else, something powerful. We have the ability to adapt, to change, to find solutions in places others might not see." Serenia's mind whirled as she tried to make sense of his words. Earth? She had heard of it, of course. It was a distant planet, considered insignificant by most of the galaxy's advanced species. It was the home of a young, emerging race, one that was still struggling to find its place among the stars. But here he was, a human standing in the heart of the Valorian assembly, speaking as though he had the answers to the very problems that had plagued her for years. Why do you think you can help me? Serenia asked, her voice thick with skepticism. You are just a human. You cannot understand what it means to be a Valorian woman. Gabriel's expression grew serious, and he took another step closer, now standing only a few feet away from her. I understand more than you think, he said softly. I know what it's like to feel like you're not enough. I know what it's like to feel like you've failed in the most important way. But I also know that failure doesn't define you. You're not broken. You just need a different way of looking at things. Serenia was quiet for a long moment, her thoughts swirling. She had never considered the idea that her infertility might not define her, that it didn't have to be the end of her story. Could a human truly offer her a way out of this prison she had built for herself? Could he offer her something that Valoria's greatest minds could not? What do you mean? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel smiled, but there was no arrogance in it, just understanding. There's more to life than the path you've been told to follow. If you want to be a mother, it's not just about having a child in the traditional way. There are other ways to create life, to nurture it, to raise it. And that's where I come in. Serenia felt a spark of hope flicker in her chest, a tiny flame that she hadn't felt in years. Could this human truly have the answers she was searching for? Could he see something in her that no one else could? As the crowd of Valorians watched in stunned silence, Serenia realized something. This was the first time in a long while that she didn't feel completely alone. The human, Gabriel, had reached her in a way that no one else had. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure what would happen next. But for the first time, she was willing to find out. The days after Gabriel's appearance in the Valorian assembly were a whirlwind for Serenia. At first, she hadn't known what to make of him. He was a human, a species that had been dismissed as insignificant by most advanced civilizations. Yet, here he was, speaking to her as if he understood something deeper, something none of the Valorians had ever considered. He had suggested that there were other ways to be a mother, that motherhood was not just about bearing children in the traditional sense. Serenia spent the next few days thinking about his words. She found herself pacing in her chambers, staring out at the endless blue sky above the city of Valoria, lost in thought. The weight of her infertility had been crushing for so long, and Gabriel's words were the first spark of hope she had felt in years. Could it really be true that there was another way? Could she truly be a mother without the biological connection she had always been told was essential? She wasn't sure what to think, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't ignore what Gabriel had said. His words had planted a seed in her mind, and now it was growing, slowly but steadily. Her pride, her past failures, her society's expectations, they all seemed distant, as if they no longer mattered as much. Something in her had shifted. It was late one evening when she finally made up her mind. After weeks of quietly thinking, researching, and considering Gabriel's suggestion, she decided to take the next step. She would seek out Gabriel again, this time with a heart that was open to the possibility of change. Serenia found Gabriel at the outskirts of the city, near the ancient temple of the Valorians. The temple was a place of reflection, where the people of Valoria came to meditate and connect with the deeper energies of their world. It was a quiet, serene place, filled with the scent of rare flowers and the sound of flowing water from the temple's fountains. Gabriel was standing by one of the fountains when Serenia approached him. He looked up as she approached, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, as if he wasn't sure whether she was ready to follow through on the path he had suggested. "Serenia," he said softly, as if unsure of what to say next. "You've come." She nodded. "I've been thinking about what you said, about what it means to be a mother, and about how it's not just about biology. And I think I'm ready to try. I want to know more." Gabriel studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Are you sure? This path is not an easy one. It's not about traditional medicine or rituals. It's something different, something no one has ever tried before." Serenia didn't hesitate. "I've been trapped in the idea that motherhood is only about bearing children, That's what my society believes. But I think I'm ready to see if there's another way. I need to know if there's hope." Gabriel nodded slowly, a look of understanding crossing his face. "Okay, but you need to understand that this won't be easy. It's not something I can explain in just a few words. It's a process, something that involves change, both physical and mental. If you're truly ready, we can begin." Serenia's heart raced, but she didn't look away. "I'm ready." Gabriel stepped closer, his eyes now focused on hers. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, shimmering object, something Serenia had never seen before. It looked almost like a small crystal, but it pulsed with an ethereal glow, casting a soft light that seemed to vibrate with energy. "This is what will start the transformation," Gabriel said, his voice low. "It's not a magic object. It's a technology, a method that humans have developed that alters the very structure of biology. It's based on cellular regeneration and adaptation. It's not perfect, but it works. It might be able to help you. But there's a catch." Serenia frowned. Her curiosity piqued. "What catch?" Serenia felt a knot form in her stomach. The Valorian Council was not known for their tolerance when it came to deviations from tradition. She had seen it happen before. Those who had broken the sacred rules of their people were cast out, exiled from the society they had once been a part of. What if the Council rejected her, just as she had feared? What if they saw her as a threat to their way of life? But there was something else, something that kept pushing her forward, something deep inside her that told her this was the right path, even if it was difficult, even if it was dangerous. She had always been strong, yes. But now, she was starting to understand that strength didn't come from simply following the rules. Strength came from within, from the courage to face the unknown, to embrace change, even when it seemed impossible. "I don't want to lose everything," Serenia said quietly, her eyes downcast. "But I can't keep living in fear. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I have to take this chance, Lyra. I have to find out if this new way of being a mother can really work." Lyra remained silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Serenia. Finally, she spoke, her voice filled with both concern and resolve. "I don't agree with this decision, Serenia. I think it's too dangerous. But I won't abandon you. I'll stand by you, no matter what happens. You are my friend, and I trust you to find your own way. Just be careful. You don't know what kind of power you're dealing with." Serenia smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. Lyra's words meant more to her than she could express. She knew that the path she was on was fraught with danger, but for the first time, she felt a sense of peace. She was no longer alone in her journey. She had her friend's support, and that was enough to push her forward. The next day, Serenia made the decision to confront the Council. She couldn't keep hiding, couldn't keep running from the truth. She had to face them, to show them that there was more to motherhood than what they had been taught. She would tell them about the changes she had undergone, about the hope she had found in Gabriel's words, and about the new path she was willing to walk. Whether they accepted her or not, she knew one thing for certain. She would no longer be defined by her infertility or by anyone else's expectations. She was ready to embrace her own future. The day had come. Serenia had made up her mind, and she couldn't wait any longer. The transformation she had undergone over the past few weeks was undeniable. Her body felt different. Her energy felt different. Everything had changed. And now she had to confront the Valorian Council, face her fears, and come to terms with her new reality. The journey to the Council's chambers was long and filled with uncertainty. Serenia's mind raced with thoughts of what might happen when she arrived. What would the Council say when they saw her? Would they understand? Or would they cast her out as an outcast, someone who had defied the sacred traditions of their people? Serenia couldn't know for sure, but she had to face them. She had made a choice, and there was no turning back now. The Council's chambers were located in the heart of Valoria, a towering structure made of gleaming white stone that reflected the light of the twin suns. The building was majestic, filled with ancient carvings and symbols that spoke of the Valorians' long history. It had always been a place of reverence, where the most important decisions were made. But today, it felt like a place of judgment, one where Serenia's future would be decided. When she arrived, the guards at the entrance hesitated for only a moment before allowing her in. They had seen the changes in her too, the way her skin shimmered with an otherworldly glow and how her eyes seemed to sparkle with an intense energy. They didn't speak, but their silent acknowledgement was enough to make Serenia feel the weight of the moment. Inside the council chamber, the high seats were filled with the respected leaders of Valoria, elders who had spent their lives upholding the customs of their people. They were all silent as Serenia entered, their eyes studying her carefully, taking in the transformation she had undergone. The room was still, heavy with anticipation. The head of the council, Elder Malaris, a wise and powerful figure who had long served as the guiding force of the Valorian people, was the first to speak. "What do you mean?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel smiled, but there was no arrogance in it, just understanding. "There's more to life than the path you've been told to follow. If you want to be a mother, it's not just about having a child in the traditional way. There are other ways to create life, to nurture it, to raise it. And that's where I come in." Serenia felt a spark of hope flicker in her chest, a tiny flame that she hadn't felt in years. Could this human truly have the answers she was searching for? Could he see something in her that no one else could? As the crowd of Valorians watched in stunned silence, Serenia realized something. This was the first time in a long while that she didn't feel completely alone. The human, Gabriel, had reached her in a way that no one else had. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure what would happen next. But for the first time, she was willing to find out. The days after Gabriel's appearance in the Valorian assembly were a whirlwind for Serenia. At first, she hadn't known what to make of him. He was a human, a species that had been dismissed as insignificant by most advanced civilizations. Yet here he was, speaking to her as if he understood something deeper, something none of the Valorians had ever considered. He had suggested that there were other ways to be a mother, that motherhood was not just about bearing children in the traditional sense. Serenia spent the next few days thinking about his words. She found herself pacing in her chambers, staring out at the endless blue sky above the city of Valoria, lost in thought. The weight of her infertility had been crushing for so long, and Gabriel's words were the first spark of hope she had felt in years. Could it really be true that there was another way? Could she truly be a mother without the biological connection she had always been told was essential? She wasn't sure what to think, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't ignore what Gabriel had said. His words had planted a seed in her mind, and now it was growing, slowly but steadily. Her pride, her past failures, her society's expectations, they all seemed distant, as if they no longer mattered as much. Something in her had shifted. It was late one evening when she finally made up her mind. After weeks of quietly thinking, researching, and considering Gabriel's suggestion, she decided to take the next step. She would seek out Gabriel again, this time with a heart that was open to the possibility of change. Serenia found Gabriel at the outskirts of the city, near the ancient temple of the Valorians. The temple was a place of reflection, where the people of Valoria came to meditate and connect with the deeper energies of their world. It was a quiet, serene place, filled with the scent of rare flowers and the sound of flowing water from the temple's fountains. Gabriel was standing by one of the fountains when Serenia approached him. He looked up as she approached, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, as if he wasn't sure whether she was ready to follow through on the path he had suggested. "Serenia," he said softly, as if unsure of what to say next. "You've come." She nodded. "I've been thinking about what you said, about what it means to be a mother, and about how it's not just about biology. And I think I'm ready to try. I want to know more." Gabriel studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Are you sure? This path is not an easy one." It's not about traditional medicine or rituals. It's something different, something no one has ever tried before. Serenia didn't hesitate. I've been trapped in the idea that motherhood is only about bearing children. That's what my society believes. But I think I'm ready to see if there's another way. I need to know if there's hope. Gabriel nodded slowly, a look of understanding crossing his face. Okay, but you need to understand that this won't be easy. It's not something I can explain in just a few words. It's a process, something that involves change, both physical and mental. If you're truly ready, we can begin. Serenia's heart raced, but she didn't look away. I'm ready. Gabriel stepped closer, his eyes now focused on hers. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, shimmering object, something Serenia had never seen before. It looked almost like a small crystal, but it pulsed with an ethereal glow, casting a soft light that seemed to vibrate with energy. This is what will start the transformation, Gabriel said, his voice low. It's not a magic object. It's a technology, a method that humans have developed that alters the very structure of biology. It's based on cellular regeneration and adaptation. It's not perfect, but it works. It might be able to help you. But there's a catch. Serenia frowned. Her curiosity piqued. What catch?